Okay, let's begin. I'd like to welcome you all again and thank you for attending today's online session from CHAP, Crop Health and Protection. We're one of the UK's agri-tech innovation centres funded by Innovate UK. CHAP specialises in driving agri-tech to support sustainable crop production, building networks across government, academia and industry to increase the adoption of innovation. You might be wondering who I am. I'm Janine Adamson, CHAP's Head of Marketing and Communications, and I'll be chairing this session for you today. What a great speaker lineup. We're definitely going to go on a journey from principles to practice. It's also a good follow-up from our Regen Ag webinar nearly a year ago. This is part 2. So we're going to open up with Cranfield's Research Fellow in Modelling for Digital Agriculture, Dr. Michail Giannitsopoulos, who is going to talk us through his PhD research findings, the effects of 5 conservation tillage systems on soil condition and crop yields in a wheat oilseed rape rotation. Cranfield is one of our partners and home to our plant phenotyping and soil health facility. Then we have Newcastle University Farms Director of Farms, James Standen, who will talk us through from field trials to the farm. Newcastle is another CHAP partner, so we're excited to hear the latest from there. Moving to Applied on Farm, Chris Taylor, Agrii Agronomist and Nuffield farming scholar, is going to talk about initial findings from his study tour, focusing on how Regen Ag can help to future-proof crop production. Unfortunately, he's double booked today, but has pre-recorded an excellent talk and presentation for us. Our final speaker is Harriet Bell, Regenerative Farming Lead for Riverford Organic Farmers. Harriet is going to tell us all about Riverford's journey beyond organic. This will then close a loop on our regen journey before we head into a Q&A. Also note, we're recording this session and we will share it afterwards for those unable to make it. You'll receive an email which you can share with colleagues. We'll also post a link on our social media channels at CHAP Agritech, all one word. Aside from the Q&A function, any problems or if you need to contact us, please use the chat box and our marketing events team will be on it. You can also use the chat for live networking. For those of you on the BASIS professional register, there's a point available for attending today, and you can enter your details online via the QR code at the end of the presentations. So before we launch into our guest speakers, I have a reminder slide about what Regen Ag is. We know it's out there, we're all hearing a lot about it, but just in case there's anyone with us today who's new to the sector or from an affiliated industry. Regen Ag. It's an approach to food production that aims to improve soil health and fertility whilst protecting water resources and biodiversity. It's a newish term, some might say buzzwords, but ultimately at its heart, it's not a new concept. Thanks to Groundswell for this illustration, which we all received at the show on a trusty tea towel a couple of years ago, very effective marketing. There's 5 principles of Regen Ag: diversity, livestock integration, protect soil surface, maintain living roots, and minimise soil disturbance. But please ask questions throughout if things are diving too deep. It's not a silly question if you have a need to ask it. Anyway, we love chat box networking. Great. So without further ado, we have our first presentation from Cranfield's Dr. Michail Giannitsopoulos. Mike completed his PhD at Cranfield and is currently a research fellow working on the data-led soil management project to improve tea management on smallholder farms in Kenya. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Mike can share his screen. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Janine, for the introduction, and well done for pronouncing my surname correctly. Let me share my screen. Okay, so today we'll go through some slides of my PhD, where we investigated the effects of 5 conservation tillage systems on soil condition and crop yields, and that was within a wheat and oilseed rape rotation. So the study was supported by Frontier Agriculture and Lamport Hall, and our soil bin analysis, which I'll talk for within the next slides, was funded by Douglas Bomford Trust. So our aim was to determine the effect of conservation tillage system on the agronomic, environmental, and economic performance, with the specific objectives to see their impact on soil condition, crop growth and yield, and energy use efficiency. Now I'll flick through some pictures showing you the tillage treatments that took part in the study. So that's the farm system, which is sort of like the baseline, what the farmer used. Within the wheat crop, it was a sumo trio that went firstly into the soil, followed by Kun HR seed drill that planted the crop. And so in the wheat that was a 2-pass system, and in the oilseed rape was a single pass system. It was just the sumo trio with a seed hopper. And our next single pass treatments included the Missouri Pro Till, the Claydon hybrid, and the sumo deep tillage seeder. And finally, we had our low disruption system. So these were working in a very shallow depth. We had the Vardesat Rapid used in winter wheat. We had the seed hawk used in year 1 for the rape, and then that was replaced by the horse sprinter in the following season. Yeah, a little bit about the experiment that was carried out at Lamport Hall Farm in the north of Northampton, like 14 kilometers. As I mentioned, crops were grown in rotation for within 2 fields in 3 cropping seasons. So wheat and oilseed rape. The experiment was a randomized complete block design with 4 replicates, and the L-shaped field was our clay loam field, and the field to the east, the top fords, was a clay field. So both fields had an area of 4 hectares. So now I'll start with effects on soil condition and crop growth and yield. We published 2 papers. One was on the impact of the tillage systems on soil physical changes and crop yields, and the other one was on their impact on soil quality indicators such as organic carbon, earthworms, and water stable aggregates. So with the results, yeah, this is the crop residue. You can see the top 2 graphs is refer to the clay loam, and the bottom 2 refer to the clay field. You can see whenever it was wheat, which if you remember, the farm system was a 2-pass system, that had the lowest amount of crop residue retained on soil surface, and in contrast, our low disruption resulted every time in the wheat, especially in the highest amount of crop residue. But then when oilseed rape was planted, and every treatment was single pass, the numbers were relatively close. Then here is our soil organic carbon table that is from the clay field, and that followed the equivalent soil mass method. So this is how we report the results here. So we took into account the bulk density, the mass of the soil. So the first 3 columns refer to season 1, and the other 3 columns in season 3. And here the last column, if you focus in the last column, it shows a change between season 1 and season 3. And you can see that again, the 2-pass system actually reduced so the soil organic carbon compared to the low disruption and the Missouri systems, which increased the organic carbon. So that was the results here are from the topsoil layer, so the top 5 centimeters. Water stable aggregates, that's in the clay loam field. In year 1, we didn't find any effect. Same in year 2, but in year 3, an effect came out. Again, with soil disruption, the low disruption resulting in a significant higher water stable aggregates compared to the other treatments. And yeah, lastly, the earthworm density. I think that's for the clay loam. Again, we measured both at 2 depths. So the first 10 centimeters and then deeper than 10 centimeters, and we distinguish between juveniles and adults. Yeah, you can, again, similar result the treatment that disturbed less the soil resulted in higher density of earthworms per unit area. Did we find any significant relationship between this what we measured? Yes. So there was a positive relationship between soil carbon and crop residue, earthworms density and crop residue too, and water stable aggregates and total organic carbon. And an example here with the arrows following our relationship in the graphs, that if we assume that within every like 10% increase in crop residue, we noted at 0.04%, or a small percent in increase in organic carbon at the topsoil, assuming a bulk density of 1.2. The same increase in residue resulted in 15 more earthworms per square meter. And this 10% increase in residue, after having the positive effect in carbon, that increase in carbon would result in an increase in 0.6% in water stable aggregates. Briefly about crop growth and yield, we didn't find any statistical differences on yields between the tillage treatments. Actually, what is interesting here, we had a problem with black grass on the wheat, as we know, with the wheat crop in the clay field, and between year 1 and 3, there was double the percentage of black grass area. So we had around 80% in year 1 that went to 16% in year 3, and a simple linear regression showed 10% increase in black grass would reduce by 17 plants, the plant density, which is around 6% decrease when we assume a target of 280 or 300 plants per square meter. I'll jump quickly on the effects of energy requirements. So this is the facility we had in Cranfield. I'll talk about how these facilities are updated, or the new ones we have now in Cranfield. So in our soil bin experiment, basically this equipment, the blue equipment you see, can move on rails and can prepare the soil in 5 centimeters layers, and we can mount there, as you can see here, the implements, and we could measure things like horizontal draft. So how much is the force to pull the implement in the soil? We can measure things like above and below ground disturbance. We can do also laser scans vertically to the runs, and these laser scans, we simply scan the area of the soil that is disturbed. And here is a sketch of how the experiment was carried out. You can see the black lines are, for instance, the runs, and the vertical red lines are the scans. And these round ones we took also bulk density and penetrometer readings as closest to the run line as possible. And here is an example, like a video that we mounted the seed hook implement and carrying out the run. And that's the graph of the horizontal draft. In the y-axis and the x-axis, the area of disturbance, and you can see the green ones, the low disruption system, resulted in lower horizontal draft requirements compared to the deep systems. I forgot to mention. So the low disruption working depth was around 1 inch, so 25 millimeters. The Sumatria was 200 millimeters, and Claydon, Missouri, working depth was 150 millimeters. And also, the deepest one resulted in a higher area of disturbance and draft requirements. And that's another graph to the left. The two together. So the draft graph is the soil bin experiment, as the previous one, but this one relays our control experiment with the field. So you can see the green ones here, the low disruption, required less amount of horizontal draft, but resulted in a higher amount of crop residue in the field. And this is their profile of how much soil they disturb below ground. Basically, this is a result of our laser scans. And yeah, briefly, just I'll repeat some of the results. So shallow working treatments gave us higher residue percentage, while the two-pass system resulted in the lowest. Change between soil organic carbon from the start to the end, so between the year 1 and 3, was greater for low disruption in Missouri compared to the two-pass farm system. Soil biology was great, earthworms was greater for low disruption for all seasons. And also we got a positive effect in final yield on water stable aggregates. And yeah, just to briefly mention that our facilities now, our updated, the new facilities, we don't have the soil bin at the moment, but we have these lysimeters, as you can see here, where we can better replicate field conditions, and we can put one after the other, and they can compact it to the degree we want, the texture we want. And we have this, I think, big mounting point that the same octagonal thing that measures the forces can be mounted there. So we can do simply, yeah, the same experiments as before. And at the bottom here, we have our rainfall simulators for measuring soil erosion at Cranfield. And you know, I did a distant picture here at the right of the phenotyping equipment. And I think that's all of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Just let you close your screen.
Okay.
Perfect. So it's really great to start our presentations with a taste of some of the latest academic research, which feeds very nicely into the ethos of Regen Ag. So now it's time to hand over to our next speaker, James Standen from Newcastle University Farms. James was a speaker at our previous Regen Ag webinar in autumn 21, back when CHAP first invested in solutions such as the system Chameleon. James is a commercial farming manager and oversees the 2 university farms, Cockle Park and Nafferton, which are farmed as one unit with a dairy herd, breeder finisher pig unit and arable enterprise. Most of the land is conventional, although there is an area of organic. He also farms in partnership with his wife on a tenanted arable and livestock farm in Yorkshire with a keen interest in sustainable farming. But today, James is going to tell us all about some of the regen-themed trials that have been taking place at Newcastle. So over to you, James.
Great, thank you, Janine, and good afternoon, everyone. I will just line up my presentation. So, great. As Ginny said, I'm the farms director at Newcastle University, and what I'm going to do is just talk you through sort of some of the overlying strategy that we've got on the farms, and also how that fits in with some of the trial work and some of the trials that we are doing. And I'll throw up a couple of progress to date slides as well. So as Janine put up at the start, we've just relaunched our strategy for the farms, and we are moving down a more regen approach and trying to overlay in our commercial work, the sort of trial work in our commercial approach, the trials and other things that people will be talking about today and that interest us as a farm in the northeast of England. And along the way, we've had we're doing a number of trials, but probably one of the most useful ones we did, which was led by Julia Cooper, a colleague at the university, was we looked at some of the challenges of regen ag in the northeast, and that sort of really set the scene for us moving forward, and helped us perhaps prioritize some of the areas and some of the work that we were going to go into. And the sort of 5 key challenges that came up, you can just about see on the bottom left-hand side there, was lack of knowledge. People didn't know how to implement, people didn't know what was going on. Financial risk was a big one. Time and labour, probably uncertainty around schemes, which probably impacts wider than just regen ag, and lack of equipment. You know, what are we going to use? And we'll talk about some of that as we go through. But our approach across the whole farm strategy has really been down that regen route. We've moved to direct drilling, and we did that sort of back in 2018. We have integrated livestock, and some new things coming that we're hoping to launch in 23 with regards to that. We've diversified our cropping really to fit in with that approach. And, you know, we have looked to feed and maintain our living soil. So we've set some targets across the farms to try and achieve. For example, we want to reduce our bagged fertilizer use by 50% while maintaining yield. And in order to do that, we've run trials this year with some of the biostimulants or microbials available. SR3, there's a little graph up there with that, with the Nutrition product out of Corteva, for example. But we've also made investments in slurry equipment. For example, we put a harvest lab on our umbilical system, so we're now recording exactly what we're putting on and where we're putting it on, so that we can follow up and target our fertilizer. And so we're integrating that sort of precision approach with regen and really using those resources. But I just want to focus on a couple of key areas and trials that we're doing, really because it's a lot of interest, and also because we with CHAP invested in some kit to enable us to do this work. So it's quite exciting to be able to launch, show you where we're up to with it. So one of the bits of kit that we invested in was a 24-meter Avidex spreader, which we set up for small seeds. And what we set up this year is a comparison of broadcasting versus drilling. And we've done 7 straights with some grasses in, although the grasses were mixed as opposed to straight, but 5 mixes. And the mixes tended to be a mixture of the straights with 1 or 2 other bits and pieces thrown in, all available on the marketplace. There's been nothing that we've designed ourselves at this point in time. So we broadcast on the 20th of August. That was about 10 days before the combine. Now you'll see that the combining was a bit later for us up in Northumberland. We hadn't finished by the end of July, but like most people had in the UK, we were still combining, and we would expect to be that. We probably started about a week earlier and finished about a week earlier than we normally do, but not that big a difference. We broadcast 12 meters through the Avidex spreader, although we have 24 meters for this comparison trial. And then we drilled 12 meter with our John Deere 758 on the 5th of September, once we'd combined and got straw cleared. And that's the sort of big issue for us in the Northeast, that we're quite tight up behind the combine. So we wanted to look at establishment, what worked well, and really go into the work around how we would get cover crops within our rotation, bearing in mind our limitations on climate and where we are regionally. I have to say, some mixed results. There's been some more biomass in the spread crops. The pictures on the left are mustard, and that has, the picture on the left there is the broadcast. The picture on the right is the drilled. Certainly when we look at this at the moment, there's more biomass but less plants in the broadcast, higher plant count. But as you can see from drilling on the 5th of September to where we are, that's the sort of level of plants that I've got. The pictures on the right are a mix, and again, sort of variable. The plant population and this layout is sporadic in the broadcast. It's much more consistent in the drilling, but again, you're looking at 2 different plant sizes. Where we think this is what we've also seen is it's not consistent. So we've tried some broadcasting into stubbles, for example, and that's worked very well. And that wasn't rolled or drilled. It was drilled on the same day, the sort of 20th of August, while we were setting up this trial. And the mixes have really come up quite nicely in the broadcast into stubbles. But the field next door where we broadcasted to stubbles, no real difference in soil or anything, has failed completely. So it's been, there's a lot of inconsistency in what we've done and what we can show this year. We've also found some seeds won't go through the Avidex spreader. And again, lesson to learn. So for example, rye, which we can drill quite comfortably at the 120 to 150 kilograms per hectare, we can't physically get it through the Avidex spreader at that sort of seed rate. And you know, so then we're up to a sort of technology equipment limitation, as opposed to, you know, it just wouldn't work. So there are some gaps. We have got 2 students going through this for us over the winter with plant counts and looking at some biomass, and they will report back for, we hope to hold an open day in February to look at some of the results from those meetings, from their results from their survey work, to really start to refine the mixes that we're going to use with this system. You know, what works well, what works consistently well for us in the northeast of England, and try and put some parameters around when to spread before combining, and or how long before combining, and what we need to do afterwards to encourage those seed rates. But some interesting results so far. I know we've just spoken about some cultivation work, and we've set up 3 fields across the farm, and to run a plough versus min-till versus direct drill across the farm, probably more to set that up for research to be overlaid upon it. The yield results are up there on the graph. The 2019 miss was because we added another field in 2020. The doesn't seem to be, you know, when we look at the results, what we're going to do with this is really to converge the cropping, so we get the same crop in each year. But at the moment, winter wheat seems a fairly robust crop in our system on direct drilling. Spring oats does okay. Spring barley does seem to do better under a plough-based system. Looking at the results, what we're really doing over the top of that is going to overlay we're doing some fungicide work with a diagnostic company up on one of the plots this year, and we want to look at nutrition. At the moment, our plots are diverging. Certainly seed rate wise, we're diverging. Herbicide timing, it's diverging. Sort of slug pellet molusticide use is diverging. At the moment, nutrition hasn't diverged between the split fields, but I expect it will do over the next 2 or 3 years. But we've got to keep a level of consistency for comparisons. Diversify the cropping. We've established in 2022 about 18 hectares of agroforestry. It's a willow poplar plus a control, which is a sort of be a grass or wildflower, and that sort of goes into our understories that we're going to put in. We have 5 replicates across those 18 hectares, 24-meter alleyways with 4.6 meter tree strips, and that's 2 double rows of willow or poplar where they are planted. Expecting to take that to that will be a biomass crop, and we're expecting to take that in sort of 3 to 4 years time. You can see our yield map on the sort of bottom right hand side, and the red areas we did have to run over crop to establish to put the willow in, so we knew it would always be a little bit messy in the first year. Winter beans have gone in and are all popping up at sort of 40 plants per meter squared, a little bit high, but it's all good in there at the moment. And what we're doing with that at the moment is we've got a couple of projects looking around policy, treescapes, how to encourage agroforestry. For us, it's a bit of agronomic learning, so it's a space to keep watching over the next couple of years, because there'll be a lot more coming. And then we're also going to overlay carbon storage and various other bits and pieces with that. Just to go into some of the other work we're going to do in sort of line with the farm, the cover crop's obviously going to lead on to destruction, establishment, mixed design, as I said earlier, and we're quite excited about that. We've got the crimper roller that we will use alongside herbicide and other methods of destruction. Nutrition, as I said, we're working on those sort of biologicals, biostimulants, and we're going to overlay precision with that one. And we're doing some work on companion cropping. Integrating livestock, we are doing a lot with cattle, but we've got something else coming in 2023 that I can't quite say yet, but it's a watch this space, because we've got an exciting project that we hope to launch in around April, May of next year, all around integrating livestock in with the arable system. I think that's it from me, and I look forward to answering some questions later.
Thank you very much, James. Really great to see the progress you've made, and I can't believe it's a year since the last Regen webinar that you spoke at. Anyway, so our next speaker, Chris Taylor, is an agronomist for Agrii. He's a Harper graduate and a Nuffield farming scholar, and he's exploring the topic: do regenerative farming practices pave the way for UK agriculture to meet net zero? Unfortunately, Chris is double booked today, but he's recorded an excellent talk for us, which we'll share shortly. He's one of our regular guest bloggers, and he's actually booked in for another blog very soon. He also wanted me to add that a big motivator for him in regards to Regen Ag is to help overcome weed, pest and disease pressure. He views this as really important from an agronomic perspective, as pressure mounts on the existing crop protection toolbox and increasing resistance issues. Also, the value of inputs. So if we can be more sustainable through Regen Ag, we can build a more resilient system and buffer our reliance on inputs such as fuel, fertilizers and traditional plant protection products. Anyway, I better let him do the talking. So Sandy, if you could play the video.
So I'm Chris Taylor. Thank you very much to CHAP for this opportunity to talk to you about regenerative farming and agronomy. I'm a 2022 Nuffield scholar studying whether regenerative farming practices pave the way for UK agriculture to meet net zero. What I really wanted this topic to be about was meeting the challenges of net zero going forward as a farming community without losing productivity. So I've been to Canada, the States and Brazil for 4 weeks so far as part of my study tour. Hopefully picked up some good advice and have this opportunity to share my findings with you so far, which is really great. And thank you again to CHAP for that opportunity, and McDonald's UK and Ireland for sponsoring me to undertake this study. So we've all discussed the principles of regenerative farming before with Groundswell and other industry bodies. So minimizing soil disturbance, the integration of livestock into arable farms and maintaining living roots as often as you can, diversity in cropping and keeping the soil surface covered. I just wanted to run you through my viewpoint on these different practices and principles, what experience I've picked up while I've been on my trip through Canada and the States. So if we went on to minimizing soil disturbance first, was really impressed when I was abroad with residue management in terms of a disc drill being utilized, very low moisture levels in a lot of the places I went to in Canada and the States, particularly across at South Dakota. I think the annual rainfall was something like 12 inches. And a lot of that was snowfall, which had to be captured. So residue management there was really important, minimizing soil disturbance to maintain as much moisture as they could and get these plants up and away to a good start. You probably see through this presentation a lot of overlap across these points, which, you know, when you're looking at an integrated holistic system, I think is the only way it will work. The picture with the wheat growing there with some mushrooms in is actually a farm I deal with in South Wales, who have really been instrumental in this journey, learning a lot as a team down there. That was wheat direct drilled with a avatar into grass lay, and obviously that minimizing of any soil disturbance there has kept that fungal population really healthy in this field. So nice to be able to sort of experiment and carry on learning while I'm home as well. Go on to the next point, the integration of livestock. This picture absolutely blew me away. So Angus, Red Angus sort of cattle in, might start a bit again if we can, but yeah, onto the integration of livestock. This picture blew me away. It was Red Angus herd on an organic farm in Canada. This was a fertility building lay really based around Lucerne, but lots of different species growing in here, and was utilized as a say fertility building throughout the lay. The livestock were in here grazing away every time the electric fence was moved to allow them further access in. They were just absolutely charging through from wherever they were, really keen to get into this fresh growth. Didn't really do it justice looking back at what they had grazed, but I'd say that third principle was really being practiced well here. So nice, not sort of being taken completely down to the ground. There was a nice lot of residue left. Some have been trampled, some obviously eaten, and a nice bit left in situ. There was a species in Canada called the monarch butterfly through the States as well. But I, again, tried to grab a picture of them, but very, very difficult to do so. But this place was full of monarch butterflies, which were, from what people told me, an endangered species. Really nice to see them just flying around the field in amongst the lucerne, the bird's foot trefoil, and other flowering species that were present here. And I think the integration of livestock, you know, the important element of it from an arable sense, if you like, is being able to take some of these cover crops and get some of those nutrient cycling a bit better. It's not maybe in the case of cows, but sheep have always been known as the golden hoof for what they do in terms of their eating and trampling in a lot of the residue that's then not eaten. I think that's a really important factor. And yeah, we were sort of looking at dung beetles that were present in the field, sort of turning over the pats that were left and having a look at what diversity of beneficial insects were in this piece. So that again was a real sort of eye opener and just a beautiful spot to be with all these cattle grazing this lay. Now the maintenance of living roots is an interesting one for me. So bottom left is a crop of forage maize, which was back at home and has been undersown, as you can see, with grass. And this really was a livestock farm, don't really grow cereals, so made a lot of sense for them to undersow with grass. When it comes off, then they don't do anywhere near as much damage in terms of sort of traffic on the field. They've got a grass lay ready established to run sheep or cattle over through the winter. It's actually very close to a river here, and yeah, really important to keep that soil in the field, stop any sort of nutrient leaching off into the river. So from an environmental point, from a farm profitability sort of point and grazing opportunities over the winter, not affecting the maize crop, it's win-win-win. And then top right is a sort of another take on that, I suppose, with maintenance of living roots through companion crops. So this was small seed rape, which has been established with beans, vetch and buckwheat. Again, a really nice way of adding some diversity, which we'll go on to shortly. But again, the maintenance of those living roots through a season. Also with oilseed rape, particular particularly bad species for mycorrhiza association. So again, we're trying to keep that mycorrhiza population from having a 12-month break with no host crops. So again, the inclusion of some beans, some vetch and some buckwheat will hopefully help them have something else to associate with, and not have this big 12-month gap where it takes a little bit of time for them to kickstart again. Then you know, obviously the oilseed rape in this situation has been strip tilled, so going back to some of the previous points, minimizing as little soil as we possibly can, whereas the maize, obviously a bit more of a sensitive crop. We're looking at strip tilling going forward, but in this particular scenario it was ploughed. I think my one sort of take-home message was not to be too prescriptive with these things. You know, it often takes a little while for people to build into these type of systems. You've got to remain profitable at the start as well. So let's not try and run before we can walk. Let's you know, just take little steps at a time, and yeah, try and look to the bigger picture in the future, rather than trying to do everything all at once. Diversity in cropping, yeah, obviously in the States and Canada, pretty amazing what could be grown, quite scary in places what was grown. In terms of lack of diversity, really, in certain parts I went to, it was pretty much all corn and soybeans round and round and round. So not a great deal of diversity going on there, and it was really the more innovative farmers I was going to who were growing alternate crops in that scenario. Yeah, sunflowers were a particularly picturesque part of the cropping out there. Very large fields. This was in South Dakota, but really, yeah, really amazing to see what some people were doing with their rotation, in terms of bringing in other species. You know, making the most of what they had in terms of markets out there. A few of the pictures on the left-hand side there are actually from back home, again trying to implement some of the findings to date. So these are a few multi-species cover crops, which, yeah, although we can't maybe integrate some of these other great crops into our rotation, there's no reason why they can't play a part over the winter in this instance. So this was a farm that would have historically just left over winter stubble before maize crop in the spring, and the last 3 years now we've introduced cover crops onto the farm. He's been growing as good a maize, if not better, than previous to now, with less fertilizer, less sort of phosphate-based fertilizer as well, and yeah, cover crops in that scenario have been playing a really big part, we both feel. Buckwheat in there to try and liberate some phosphate that would otherwise be locked up. Got sort of vetches in there and clovers trying to build some nitrogen. We've got oil radish there, which is again trying to sort of capture nitrogen. You can just about see a few sunflowers in there. That this was planted late July after winter barley. So yeah, managed to put some sunflowers into this mix, which if it had got any later was probably not the best thing to do, but yeah, a real great amount of diversity in there with some volunteer cereals, admittedly, but some cereal rye as well. So I think this was a 7, if not 8-way mix, which looks an absolute picture, and has been producing the goods the last few years in what we want to achieve on the farm. Keeping the soil surface covered, some really interesting ways found of this occurring. So a lot of stripper headers used where moisture was limiting. They wanted to leave as much sort of stubble in place as they could, and for ease of drilling, it was better if the stubble was sort of erect and upright. Wind was a big issue in this particular place as well, so it was sort of baking heat, a lot of wind, found actually the straw residue was a lot better for capturing some of the snowfall and that keeping that snow melting in situ rather than having that evaporate off the surface. The picture on the left here was actually some crimped rye in a organic system. So this was organic soybeans being grown. The rye was down as a mulch. So fascinating to see how a cover crop could be utilised as weed suppressant through the season. And yeah, we're talking about sort of allelopathic effects there of cereal rye, keeping that ground covered and acting as a sort of weed mulch, which if you were growing, say, a cereal crop, would have been a real concern with that lockup of carbon to nitrogen ratios in the soil. But with it being a legume, performed very, very well. And yeah, really fascinating to see some really clean soybeans, which have been in a long-term organic system. If I go to the for me is the far right. This was a residue mat in a continuous corn scenario, and I suppose you'd think of continuous corn as not being great from some of the previous principles, but in a trial scenario, this was actually the biggest organic matter level they'd managed to raise the soil to over a sort of 30-year period. So this was continuous no-till corn for 30 years. That residue mat was pretty thick in places, good couple of inches, not a great deal of breakdown there. And yeah, from a sense of sort of disease management, again, perhaps not great, but really good insight into what that residue can do from building organic matter, maintaining a lot of moisture in the soil, capturing snow melt again. It was, yeah, really fascinated to see how they come about these challenges of this massive residue mat and getting through that and still growing a crop. And again, the effects that had over a 30-year period on organic matter. I think again, it's a lot of these principles are very interlinked once you get into the system, and we're talking about sort of diversity, living roots at all times, and some of these pictures, you know, especially the sort of soybeans and the rye, there was a really nice sort of story there with those two growing in situ and one benefiting the other. So that's as much as I've probably got time to go through today. But I'm on Twitter at CropWalkerChris if you'd like to reach out. Thank you again to Chap for this opportunity to talk to you today. And again, thank you to Nuffield Farming and McDonald's UK and Ireland for the opportunity to go away and do this research. Thank you.
Great. Just to remind that if you do have any questions for Chris, then we can send them over to him, or yeah, definitely contact and reach out to him on social media. He's very good on Twitter. So now, to close the loop from a practical perspective, it's our final speaker, Harriet Bell, Regenerative Farming Lead for Rutherford Organic Farmers. Harriet's mission is to tackle climate change through the way we eat and the landscapes we eat from. And being a native Londoner, she can certainly give a different perspective on things. Hopefully you've heard of Rutherford. Yes, the Veg Box people, get my words out, founded by Guy Singh Watson. They've achieved fantastic things, and I'm extremely pleased to introduce Harriet to you, who's going to share some of Rutherford's experiences with Regen Ag. Over to you.
Thanks, Janine. Good morning. I'm Harriet. I'm the Regenerative Farming Lead at Rutherford Organic Farmers. I've actually only been in post for about 11 months, so we're really early on in our kind of journey of this latest project, and I'm just going to kind of talk you through our thinking and our rationale, and also some of the challenge that regenerative agriculture, I think, brings to a really established organic brand. So we're doing our work on regenerative agriculture under the strapline Farm for the Future, which is quite a common strapline, it seems. But what I'm specifically kind of focusing on, the framing, is kind of tackling the problems and delivering the promise of agriculture, because I think that is essentially key to kind of what regenerative agriculture promises. And by tackling the problems, I mean, we definitely know that we have issues, and we should deal with those first. But delivering the promise is, I think, about creating greater resilience in an increasingly stressed farm system. So yeah, the reasons that we as a business want to be kind of reevaluating our farming, or what our farming is the kind of, we believe obviously that organic farming is better, but we absolutely know it's not flawless. And so when I think about regenerative agriculture, for example, in my mind, the best organic farms are regenerative, the best regenerative farms are organic. But the same is also true. The least good organic farms are probably not regenerative. And it's really interesting following some of the presentations that we've just had, because we know that organic farming brings a really particular set of challenges, particularly around cultivation. So for some of our crops, we will do 8 cultivations as part of that, curating that crop. So we know that because we're organic, we have very high soil biology, but we know we have very poor soil aggregate stability, and that brings a sort of different set of problems. And the other, I think, challenge is how we talk about this as a brand, because, you know, for us, the fact that being organic is a kind of environmental leading activity, and has been for the last 30 years, and it's actually not particularly dissimilar from what makes regenerative farming regenerative, is sort of key to our brand identity. But we still want to talk about the stuff that isn't working, and it's an interesting kind of journey then to take our consumers on. You know, we haven't been misselling you what we are, because it is better, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still kind of room for us to improve. I think one of the other big challenges we're all dealing with at the moment is, of course, that farming is changing, and that is putting pressures on us in a whole load of kind of different ways. So we're seeing challenges around on-farm technology, and one of the things I've actually particularly, I'm actually come from more of a livestock farming background, so one of the things that I've noticed since joining Riverford is that so many of the regenerative farming pioneers sit within arable or livestock, and that seems to be where most particularly of the tech development and research is happening, and veg seems to be not so prevalent, or there's no obvious kind of regen farming lead in veg at scale. So most of the kind of well-known sort of regenerative horticulture pioneers tend to be quite small, or you've got some quite sort of big horticultural enterprises who are quite protective of their R&D. And I think we face a particular challenge with our suppliers, because they tend to be a kind of more medium-sized mixed rotation farming, which is actually what you want in a regenerative system, but it is not where the research and the R&D development is happening. And we also obviously are seeing a lot of uncertainty affecting our supply chain, as we see significant changes in farm subsidy. And part of how we want to deliver this programme is about how we can financially and sort of socially support our suppliers through that. And then some of you might recognise Mr. Monbiot there. I think there's a particular pressure coming in from a kind of on consumers about what is an environmental product that is coming from the foodstuffs industry. So these might be sort of very heavily processed foods, come with a sort of probably a nicer profit margin than sometimes a basic vegetable does. And we're seeing probably for the first time in a while a real challenge on environmental grounds with our consumers about what is an environmentally positive product. And it's going to be really interesting for us to negotiate our path through that as the kind of brand that we are. A massive driver for all of us when it comes to kind of reevaluating the way we farm is the way that we're seeing kind of climate change impact our farm system. So the picture on the right in this case is our founder Guy standing in the middle of what was one of our biggest reservoirs. Well, it is one of our biggest reservoirs. It's empty this summer for the second time in about 35 years, but we will expect that to happen more often going forward. So how do we redesign our farm systems or our farm landscapes to make them more resilient? And then the flip side of that is Sackerwell Farm is actually our other farm, which is just outside of Peterborough. This map is from a map that helps you understand what the different climate change predictions are likely to mean in terms of practical impacts on the ground. So this is the level of increased flooding that we are likely to see around that farm in future under a 1.5 degree scenario. We would expect increased flooding like that to disrupt our production, but also delivery and supply. So that's going to be a key business challenge. So how we use regenerative farming as part of adaptation within the business is going to be really important to us going forwards. And finally, I think customer storytelling. And again, there's the obvious thing about that we've done for a long time, which is talk about the kind of environmental benefits of our farming approach as a way to attract customers. But again, I think it's really interesting to kind of have the challenge that Regen Ag brings about how much is this confusing our customers? Do they assume that organic is regenerative? Have they heard of regenerative, or is it actually kind of more of a niche industry term that we just assume that other people are picking up on? Do they assume that one is better or one is worse? There's a lot of uncertainty for us about what the public perception of regenerative farming is, and therefore how to kind of pitch our narrative and tell the story about what we're doing going forward. And these are some examples of some sort of small scale stories we've had. So that's a strip tillage experiment that some of our suppliers are doing, use of herbal lays as part of managing our soil fertility, and then a free roaming pig that was helping with weeding. Now, I personally don't think it matters whether you're coming from a kind of conventional farming perspective or an organic farming perspective. If you're looking at, what it takes to move to a regenerative system, I think the challenges are the same. And for me, one of the things that I wish we saw more of in farming is social research and social science about how we manage all farmers through change. So this is the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is quite a sort of well-referenced or frequently used diagram to kind of show the stages of emotive response that people usually have for change. And I'm not convinced they're hugely different for organic farmers or more conventional chemical farmers. Because I think a big part of it is as soon as you go and talk to a farmer and sort of say, we kind of need you to be a bit better, there's an implicit criticism and an implicit judgment in that, that what they have been doing up until now hasn't been enough or hasn't been good enough, and you want them to make changes to be better. But when farming is such a really sort of core part of your identity as who you are, whether it's because you're farming in a way that you kind of got taught by your grandfather, or because you think, well, hang on a second, I've been a pioneering organic farmer for 30 years. Why, on what grounds do you have to come and tell me that there's room for improvement, or we could do things differently, or we could do things better? And it's not always the case. Everybody has a kind of different change journey. So some people can kind of leap really quickly and very happily into experimentation and making new decisions. Some people tend to wallow in denial and depression for a while, so that's why I think there's a huge opportunity to do more social research about how we can support farmers going through this process, possibly slightly faster, so we can start to see kind of more innovations happening in regenerative agriculture. So how are we setting the framework for our regenerative agriculture? For us, we wanted it to be data informed, but not data led. So one of our first key objectives then is to increase what we know about our suppliers. So our suppliers have all been organic, obviously, for a long time, and we've tended to rely therefore on the organic certification as an indicator of their kind of environmental practice or farm practices. And we don't feel that that's sufficient really any longer. We need to know a lot more about what is going on in our farm systems, and we need to hold that information systemically, or rather across the organisation, because at the moment our crop walker, for example, and our procurement director will know each individual farmer quite well, and they'll have an idea of what's going on in their land, but we don't necessarily hold that data well as an organisation. So for us, our first step was to decide the framework that we would use to capture that information. There are a number of whole farm assessment tools on the market already. We have opted to trial the Soil Association Exchange this year with a chunk of our supply chain, because when we looked at the tools available, we thought this seemed the most robust. And then obviously because it's working with the Soil Association, which a lot of our suppliers already do. And so we've been trialing this on 10 farms this year. It sort of assesses the farm across kind of 6 basic baselines of climate change, soils, water, biodiversity and animal welfare, and social impacts. And our intention is to use this data to really inform our kind of strategy going forward, but also to set some new benchmarks within our supply chain. So yes, we expect you to be certified organic, but now we also expect, X amount of tree cover on your farm, or, a base level of soil carbon that equates to something relevant to your soil type. But also for us, we hope that providing or using a whole farm assessment tool like that will really also help our suppliers in kind of their learning journey. So it isn't about us kind of dictating down what we expect for them, but it's about us facilitating them having access to the data and the information to reflect on and possibly alter some of their own decision making farm management approaches. And I personally would kind of advocate generally in farming, and what I hope sort of the focus on regenerative farming will lead to is a greater emphasis on quantifying the outputs from the farm system, rather than insisting, as we've sort of tended to historically do, either with certification or with government subsidy, that farmers follow prescriptions. Because I think that, you know, the best regenerative farmers have that sort of appetite for, you know, experimentation that we really want to foster, build on, and encourage. And I think if we can move to kind of outcomes-based measurement systems, that really helps that. And then once we have that data set in place for us, I think, you know, a key thing for us is about how we use that to invest in R&D. And as I sort of said, I think this is an area that in the regen farming world I've sort of seen really sort of lacking in R&D, looking at horticulture specifically. So, you know, a lot of work on cover crops for arable, whereas that work on cover crops for horticulture. So we have two routes to R&D sort of planned out. So one is using kind of product specific data. So we're kind of doing a life cycle carbon analysis, for example, at some of the key products that we produce here on Wash Farm. And that will help us identify, you know, where we want to do R&D, for example, about altering our cultivation methods, because we can see that it's, you know, a particular crop, it's particularly impactful in the life cycle carbon analysis. But we also then want to use the broader set of data that we're kind of getting out of the Soil Association Exchange about those kind of key broad sort of areas like water quality and things like that, and put those sort of two data sets together to help determine where our R&D spend is best invested. Obviously, again, particularly challenging time for that right now. Cost of living crisis is certainly impacting our bottom line. And we know that it's also having a significant impact on our suppliers, which makes it particularly difficult then for them to kind of find the time and resources to do an additional investment on farm at the moment. Broadly, in the context of horticulture, we are expecting to see our sort of R&D fall into the 5 categories that you see there on the screen. So perennial crops. So we've been doing a big piece of work at the moment already on establishing nut agroforestry across our supply chain. Our founder thinks that's something that has a lot of kind of untapped potential in the UK, but we're also particularly interested to see what can be done going forward around perennial vegetables. And again, not a huge amount of kind of research has gone into the potential of perennial vegetables as a more commercial crop thus far. They tend to be mostly kept by quite sort of small scale allotmenteers. Cover crops, again, as I said, huge amount of research has gone into it from an arable perspective, far less has gone into it from a horticulture perspective. Cultivation, and basically we're looking at robotics and what kind of machinery and mechanization could really help us, even if we can't reduce the amount of cultivation that we can do, although that would be preferable. Can we kind of lighten the load or lighten the impact that cultivation has on our soil? Inputs, as I said, organic is not perfect. We still have some problematic areas, peat and plastic being two of the most significant ones that we would really like to be able to sort of phase out of our supply chain, and then resilience, like under the future climate scenarios, how are we going to see that impact our kind of usual cropping plans? What can we do now to kind of prepare for that, change that going forward, so that we are seeing as few crop losses as we can, hopefully steer ourselves kind of very successfully into the future from a kind of more regenerative basis. I think that's probably it for me.
Thank you very much, Harriet. If you just don't mind stopping your screen share, and then we're going to head into a Q&A. Thank you again, Harriet. Really great to get the insight into Riverford's powerhouse brand. Really interesting. Time for Q&A. So hopefully everyone can stay with us. So I'd like to welcome back all of our speakers, except Chris, of course. So if you can all pop your cameras on and your audio, welcome back, team. And for everyone in the audience, there is still a chance to ask your questions and your feed. And if we don't get time, we'll address them afterwards. And I'll also send them over to Chris if they're for Chris. So I've got one here. I'll start off with one for James, actually. James, simply put, are you now zero insecticides? Sorry if it was missed saying earlier.
We took the decision 4 years ago to not use insecticides, and it's raised a bit of debate around the agroforestry, as we think pest pressure will increase before it decreases with the agroforestry. So we are taking some risk, but we've just decided as a policy that we would stop and allow our predators to build up.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is one for Mike. Did you explore deeper into the soil profile? What are your thoughts on the impacts that might be taking place throughout the soil profile?
Yes, for some properties, yeah, like carbon and bulk density, we did explore the top 5 centimeters, and we sampled also in 15 to 20. And there was an indication that the farm system, so what the farmer used, increased the porosity of the soil at the top layer, and in most cases at the deeper layer. That was, expected, because that was the deepest working implement. And yeah, some other tines were not, as effective as the farm system because of their geometry. So if you have a very narrow tine working really deep, you will have like lateral failure. So instead of your soil to be loosening in a crescent-like failure, like upward and forward, you will get this lateral failure to the sides of the tine. I think in terms of carbon, most of the carbon was on so the higher values were on topsoil, and and in the deeper soil there was no significant effect, and that was really small as expected. I think that's
Great. Thank you very much. I've got another one for James. Sorry, they're very specific here for you, James. Do you have the opportunity for cover crop after winter barley? Ours is entry for oilseed rape, and we can struggle for biomass on heavy land when sown after wheat.
We're probably in exactly the same situation, that we use winter barley as our entry in for oilseed rape. And if we leave it any later, it is very late, So as I showed you, we were combining on the 30th of August when most of the country had finished by the sort of before the end of July. We are one of the reasons for going down the route with chaff for the Avidex spreader was we wanted to really bring the cover crop establishment before combining. So that sort of middle of August period when we were still into wheat, crop was still standing, and so germination can carry out under in the understory, and then the combine comes through and then we take the straw away. That's really where we are focusing, because otherwise we like we don't have that opportunity. We need to go into oilseed rape after winter barley. We're just trying to create more opportunities with some of the kit that we've invested in, and that's really the focus of our sort of trials and sort of research over the next couple of years, really.
Now I've got a really meaty one here, which I'd love to throw out to the panel. Unfortunately, Chris can't answer this because he's not here, but the adoption of integrated pest management or integrated farm management is low in the UK. What makes you all as a panel think the adoption of regen ag will be better adopted? I don't know who wants to kick off with that one. Maybe Harriet.
Well, I don't know that I have a great answer for it. I mean, sometimes I think what makes regen ag appealing, and this is something that we debate a lot as Riverford, is it is not in any way standardized, which means it has a very kind of low bar to entry. You can be very conventional intensive farmer, put in a crop for crop, and suddenly you get to claim this kind of regen ag farmer identity. And there's quite like a culture of enthusiasm that has kind of developed around it. It's also had some really big political pushes, such as the current sort of fertilizer price and fuel prices, that are sort of driving farmers to look for solutions which herbicide and pesticide doesn't necessarily have at the same time from a kind of integrated pest management perspective. So I think that is probably looking for some bigger levers than it has at the moment. And the other thing in integrated pest management's disfavor, if you like, is that it is actually possibly even more complex, even more locally specific, and harder to very, very clearly evidence. So for example, I will talk to some of our growers and they're like, well, why would I need integrated pest management? I'm organic, there should be insects everywhere. And I have these lovely hedgerows, and it's a sort of detail about, yes, but certain insects will only fly certain sort of distances into your field, which means that you need another sort of host plant for them to have in field. And that can be really variable depending on the insects you want, the crop type you've currently got. And I think it's that level of uncertainty and complexity that people often find off-putting.
James or Mike, any thoughts?
I would like to think it's higher than low across the UK. I think it's perhaps what the regen approach will do is it's that thinking before you do things, and that's around the integrated pest management. So perhaps we're going to think about the outcome, as Harriet said, rather than the sort of the audit process or the scheme thinking. So perhaps it will help people think about what they're trying to achieve. I don't know. I'm probably not as negative as the low. Most of my peer group are thinking about things and what they do. Probably they just need to take that next step, and that will perhaps increase the pace of change. But I think if we thought more about outcomes, as Harriet said, really.
Mike, anything to conclude?
Yes, I agree with both of the Harriet and James. So yeah, regenerative agriculture is based on the principle produce more from less. And I think the most important answer before practicing anything is why you want to follow this kind of approach, what you want to improve. And everything is site specific, and you should allow time as well. So apart from site specific, it's climate specific, depends on the management history, and all this kind of details before starting, practicing, such methods.
Great, thank you. I think I probably got time for one more. I'm afraid they were a bit thick and fast for James. So James, if you modified herbicide choice or timed a previous crop to aid cover crop establishment, some trials in this area will be helpful. Is that what you've got coming up maybe?
Over the next couple of years, yes. Probably in the first instance, it's modified our use of glyphosate in getting that cover crop established in the standing crop. We did a bit of work a couple of years ago broadcasting in and with timings after glyphosate, and we got pretty good plant counts. We just couldn't get the 24 meters, hence the Avidex. We got pretty good plant counts of brassicas following, which we then had livestock out on through the winter. So yes, we perhaps need to think further back, and I will go back where we've had some failures and some successes. I will go back and look at herbicide, and that might change our plan. So no, good question, and more work to do in that area.
Thank you. Now, I'm very sorry, but we're going to have to wrap things up because it's the end of the webinar and I'm conscious of time. But we regularly host webinars like these. As an independent not-for-profit organisation, they really are of high importance to us. That's because we're about building relationships and networks to accelerate our industry's innovation journey. And what better way than through sharing insights with this fantastic speaker lineup today. So I've just got a few closing slides to share. If you can just hang on while I bring those up. Hopefully we can see those now. So yes, as explained earlier, we're going to be in contact with the webinar recording so you can share with colleagues who couldn't attend live, and we'll also post a link on social media at Chap Agritech, all one word. Please follow us if you don't already. Now, here's a very good one. You can actually sign up to a free tour of our facilities at Cranfield, which we co-run with our sister centre Agrii Epi. It's on Tuesday, November the 29th, and we're running a morning and an afternoon session. So if you want to sign up, just email me. It's only a couple of hours and you might even get to meet some new contacts. We tour a different facility each season. So if this one isn't for you, keep an eye out for the next one when we announce it. So if you've got any questions, contact me and I'll forward to our speakers or point you in the right direction. Sorry we couldn't get through every single question in the Q&A, but thank you again for joining us and our guest speakers today. A massive applause to them. I think they've done an amazing job.